There we go. Well, welcome everyone. And this is our virtual intellectual community at the Humanities Institute at Stony Brook. And, I really thank you for being here today. I know it's the final week of the semester. It is also a very special semester, so it's a peculiar week in a peculiar time. And I know everybody's very busy, but we thought we still wanted to have an opportunity to celebrate the semester. And this activity today is our big salvo, saying both thank you and enjoying the company of everyone for one more activity. I would like to extend the warmest welcome to all of you, and especially to our guests today, Kristina Wong and the musical group Ensemble Decipher, as well as Julie Sheehan. Before introducing today's event, which more formally, which will be done later, I would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone of one day's event, the Art of Confinement, and this is the wonderful poster that Adrian Unger did for us, marks the closing event of what has been a very intensive spring at the Institute. In spite, or perhaps because this special environment, this electronic virtual format, we have had our lectures, conferences, reading groups, and writing seminars. They have had the largest audiences ever, and also the most participative ever. So we are happy about that. We know this is not the ideal. We were just talking about it, but at the same time, we have been able to continue our activities thanks to Zoom, and we continue to think about new ways of improving this for the future and for the future semester. So we'd like to thank you, all of you, for your support, and we look forward to the fall when we will continue serving the Stony Brook community with our programs and research at the Humanities Institute. This event, the Art of Confinement, has been completely organized by the Institute Students Board. This is the first year we have a student board, and we are so happy of something that we've been trying to achieve for many years, because we want the students' input, their point of view, their interest to form part of our programming and also of our research. The student board thought the concept, they selected the guests, and also they put together the format. By the way, if any undergraduate or graduate student in the audience wants to become a member or join the Student Advisory Board, please send me or Adrian Unger an email. You can find our addresses again at the web page of the Institute. Both Adriana and I have enjoyed working with this group of students in preparation for today, but I will now pass the virtual microphone to one of them, Megan Hines, a PhD candidate in art, history, and criticism, who will introduce the rest of the members of the board as they coordinate the rest of the event. It's really your event, and we are going to enjoy it together. Thank you. So Megan, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for that introduction. And I am going to go ahead and spotlight the other members of the Student Advisory Board to thank them and kind of let everybody know how the program will proceed today. So I want to thank Sehandra Benjamin, who's an undergraduate student in English and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, Michael Bennett, who's a graduate student in Music History and Theory, Roman Kubovich, who is an undergraduate student in Art History and Criticism, Genevieve Ruzicka, a grad student in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and Joseph Swift, who is a grad student in Music. I also want to thank Professor Adrian Perez Melgosa and Adrian Unger, who guided us and supported us as we planned this event, as well as Professor Susan Shekel, who I know is here today, with whom we first began the planning process. So we, the Student Advisory Board, first met in the fall of 2020 to discuss what our role within the Humanities Institute might be, and how we could celebrate the work of the arts and humanities on campus. So representing a range of disciplines, we agreed that we wanted programming that would bring together students and professors from across the university. And we also wanted programming that would speak to contemporary issues of the day. Of course, first in our minds was the COVID-19 public health crisis and its impacts on our physical and mental health. So while everyone has had a unique pandemic experience, so many of us are grieving and feeling the effects of isolation, all while struggling to somehow remain productive and connected. So this event, The Art of Confinement, is about highlighting practitioners working in performance, music, and poetry who have used their creative practices to create connection in this time of isolation. We will also ask everyone in the audience to participate in some way. You can do that through what we're calling the COVID collage. Please also speak up during the Q&A sessions. So I want to go ahead and thank our guests, as Adrienne already did, Kristina Wong, Ensemble Decipher, and Professor Julie Sheehan. And now I will turn it over to Sihandra, who will introduce our first guest, Kristina Wong.
Hi, everyone. On behalf of the Humanities Institute, it is with great honor to introduce our guest speaker for this afternoon. As a performance artist, comedian, and writer, she has made herself known across North America, the UK, Hong Kong, and Africa. She has been featured in the New York Times All of Color series, which featured artists of color who use humor to make commentary on ways in which races interacted on in America. Her commentary has been seen in America Public's, Media Marketplace, PBS, Jezebel, XL Jane, Playgirl Magazine, and the Huffington Post. Her work has earned her grants from Creative Capital, the MAP Fund, the Center for Cultural Innovation, the Do Free Foundation, the National Performance Network, 6 Artists of Residence grants, a COLA Masters Artist Fellowship from Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, a place in the YBCA 100, and a Focus Award from Kearney Street Workshop, to name a few of her accomplishments. On TV, she has been seen on Comedy Central's The Nightly Show with Larry Wilmore, FXX, Totally Biased with Camus Bell, Al Jazeera's The Stream, AM Tonight's On Fusion, General Hospital, Nickelodeon, Nikki's Ricky, Dickie and Dawn, and Mixed TVs in Asian America, I'm Asian American, and Want Reparations for Yellow Fever. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to Kristina Wong.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Stony Brook, for having me. I'm Kristina Wong. I am here on Tongva land, otherwise known as Koreatown, Los Angeles. And I think I'll play a clip of my previous work. I can also just show a PowerPoint, which I think is a little bit more updated in terms of my work. But why don't we show the video clip actually, and then I'll fill in the gaps.
The Wong Street Journal! Money, must be funny in a rich man's world. I'm Asian. Surprise! And to my parents' grave disappointment, I am not a Wall Street trader nor captain of industry. I am a performance artist who fights for the marginalized. And here is where I do my best work: the armchair. And this is what I use to take them all down: the iPad. Kristina, you cannot have an existential crisis right now. Existential crises are for those women who read, eat, pray, love. I'll go to #Africa. The dark continent. Brought to you by white people. You know, here we call you Mzungu. That is Swahili for white person. White privilege. White privilege! I rock the first iPhone
It's like a spaceship here, but a joke back at home. It's like I'm the Asian Oprah. Through African eyes, I'm the big white Oprah.
So as someone who is not black, not white, but is an Asian American performance artist, how do I engage this situation, leave a legacy, but without being a colonial asshole?
See the world through her eyes like Dustin Hoffman and Tootsie. You gotta earn her consent if you wanna go near her pussy.
Okay,
Every woman's
that's good.
Wonder Woman, superheroes without capes. I wish she had the power.
This is where it gets
to stop the
promotional.
violence.
So that was an older show called the Wong Street Journal, and I like to call it a very Obama era show because at the time I premiered it in 2015, it felt like I could explore the world outside of America because we were sort of not panicked. Like there's definitely stuff going down here, but it felt like there was some freedom to think beyond the immediate panic of survival day to day, which is sort of what we're living in now with the pandemic. And in that particular show, I explore my relationship. I basically went to volunteer with the Microlin organization, thinking that I would create a show that looked at the global economy, and I ended up making a hit rap album with local rappers, which is the music that you hear in the background. I met these rappers in the street, followed them into a studio, and then next thing you know, I'm recording a hit rap album that plays in northern Uganda. And while that's like a really kind of mythic story, I realized very quickly that, it's not that they saw my innate talent for hip hop, it's that I was I was a Western person who had access to resources from the outside, and figuring out how to support them in the growth of their music studio was not as simple as like, okay, here's some money. Like I had to figure out how, because so much of the West's showing up in other countries and trying to offer aid and just sort of either throwing money at the situation or this is what we think you need ends up not being what they need, or creates more dysfunction within local economies. So anyway, I went from that to making a reality television show pilot, which I sold to True TV when Obama was still in office. And the premise of it was that I was this prankster or this activist named Kristina Wong, that's my actual name, and that I have all these sort of pranky like ideas for how to get people engaged in social justice. That it was like Nathan For You, if you know the show on Comedy Central, meets Michael Moore. So it's like these long-winded rabbit hole logic ideas for activism that didn't quite work, but it was fun to watch it play out. And once Trump took office, none of those tactics made any sense. It didn't make sense to make fun of myself, even lovingly, as an activist, because it became a liability to Asians, to to the activist movement, to the left. And so me as this like scrambling activist didn't make sense. But we shot the pilot anyway. True TV did not order it for a season, and I find myself an out of work reality television star in a world where satire just didn't make sense anymore, because we were living in a world that felt like living satire. You pick up the newspaper in the last 4 or 5 years and it feels like, is this The Onion? No, this is the actual newspaper I'm reading, right? And so what do out of work reality television stars do? They run for public office. So that's this show behind me, Kristina Wong for public office. I actually ran for local office twice. And I won the second election, which is neighborhood council here in Koreatown. So I represent Subdistrict 5, which is the half square mile I live in. It's an unpaid volunteer position. I won with 72 votes, if you include the vote that I cast for myself. And I wrote a show about that was going to play all last year up into the election, right? The idea is that I would be in this crazy raucous rally, shaking hands and doing all this stuff, and it premiered in February. It was set to tour the country, as all theater pieces kind of were, and then of course we all know what happened. It was postponed, so I had to adapt it to my house, and that's what you see here is a set in my house, and I had to adapt it to Zoom, which is kind of insane because I just didn't think that was possible. Now I see people jumping up on the camera, so I don't know if you're here to ask me questions or You just
Yeah, go ahead and ask. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I love that we get to see in person, like your set as you've created it. And so I'd like to ask you specifically about your transition from your skills that you've garnered creating sets, so working with fabric and sewing, to this, what you call sweatshop project, where you were making masks and distributing them all over the country. So
absolutely.
I wonder if you could speak to that and think of it, is it thought of as a performance? Is this ultimately like a public health service? Like, how do we think about it and classify it?
It's all of that. So pandemic happened. Suddenly I'm at home with looking at all these red lines, going through all my public schedule. And I've sewn my set pieces. You saw the last show I did that had hand sewn pieces. It was my first time sewing a set. I'm not trained formally in set design or even as a seamstress. And but I sewed these on a Hello Kitty sewing machine. And a lot of the reason why I was sewing my own sets is because it was easier to tour with. I can get an entire set into 2 check-in bags and then fill a space heavily. Now, when the pandemic hit, I saw that there was a need for homemade masks. And I was feeling really bummed out because suddenly all artists were non-essential workers, right? And we were like at home going, great, no, we're useless. We're sitting here hiding from the world, not getting everyone sick, doing our part by being non-essential people at home. And I got really excited that I had this one basic homesteading skill to help people. So I took some scraps of fabric I had and sewed my first mask. It was super messy, then naively offered to the world, if you are immunocompromised or an essential worker and don't have access to a mask, which a lot of folks did not, March of last year, it was such a foreign idea, let me sew you a mask. And that avalanched into like some very scary messages from nurses who were like, I'm afraid to go to work. My nurse unit needs 50. And I just kept saying yes. Even though I had like time wise, it was impossible. Like the most I could do and I'd be exhausted would be like 30 a day. So I started a group called the Auntie Sewing Squad, not realizing our acronym was ASS, but it was just a Facebook group that I was like, okay, this will be a temporary group. Just so, because the government was going to step in and provide masks for everyone. Like 3 weeks later, like once we get these cargo ships coming from China, we'll be good. We are still sewing now. People are getting vaccinated, but we're still sewing now. And the need shifted very quickly. We were like, once we realized, oh wow, these hospitals, they have marketing departments. They have people who can find people like us to sew. What about all these people who don't have that, who don't have the internet, who don't have, can't speak English? How do we find them? So these are farm workers, these are migrants at the border, these are undocumented communities, formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated communities, and in indigenous communities. And that's where the shift happened, where we had to set a system in place to try to find the people in those communities who had ways to distribute masks. And so we've made and distributed 300,000 masks. We're a national network. We organize mostly on Facebook, but so much of our staying power is that we've become a very social group. We've become very political in the sense that at first it was like this very patriotic duty. We're just going to sew to help our fellow Americans. And then it was like, why are we still sewing? Why is the government not stepped in? Why is the guy in charge telling people not to wear masks if they don't want to? And it becomes clear that once we looked at these communities that were severely impacted by the crisis, that what consistently connected them is they were mostly communities of color who have borne the brunt of structural violence and systemic racism across American history. And that really hit us. And unlike other sewing groups that were really like formed to like just work, heads down on the sewing machine, we had to find ways to take care of each other. But in terms of sending care to the different aunties so they don't burn out at their machines, and many did burn out, but also making clear that this has become now a political and activist project. And I'll take you on a tour. Like this is basically my whole home. This whole area is all the supplies for sewing masks. So at like one point, it felt like I was running a hospital factory out of my house. It was nuts. So I've been creating a new show called Kristina Wong Sweatshop Overlord, which also, so I have like 2 shows in rep, plus I give talks like this. I have Kristina Wong for Public Office and this Kristina Wong Sweatshop Overlord show, which will be at New York Theater Workshop next week. It's me running around the house, basically a living diary of what it was like to create this factory remotely in my house with no experience in relief work and no experience running a garment line. So crazy. So, and a lot of it connecting the fact that a lot of our first aunties who joined were Asian. And it wasn't like me saying Asians only, it was that we got this skill as a survival skill from our grandmothers and mothers, many who worked in the garment industry. And so it felt even more political that we're reperforming this labor that was already kind of made invisible and gendered, and made it to be like this underpaid women's work. And we're doing it now for free. And so we had to find ways to communicate to people asking for masks that no, this is labor. These are the people sewing your masks. This is political. This is not just like, well, okay, we're expendable. You need masks, here they go. So it's been this huge social project that if you told me a year ago it had blown up into this, I might not have gotten into it.
Yeah, I have so many questions and thoughts. I want to let Sihendra ask questions, and then I want to open it up to the audience as well, because I'm sure people are curious about this project. And I'm thinking specifically about what the future looks like if we reach kind of a horizon point where it seems that the pandemic is in the past, but we know the work continues. Maybe I'll let Sihendra or anyone jump in.
Yeah, sure. You already spoke about working out of your home, but what about your creative process has changed or remained the same during or since the pandemic? And what has been your favorite?
Well, I had to convert a rally that was supposed to happen in a big stadium to my house with an audience who I can only hear in the chat. And so we figured out some things, like, you know how in rallies when they bring someone up to endorse you, I have this whole scene where I try to find the whitest guy in the room. Is there anyone named Chad out there today? Brad, Todd, Scott, Mackenzie, Seamus, Tanner, right? Like, but in, I used to do that in the audience. Thank you, Roman, for being the only one laughing out loud on that one. But like, I would bring them up on stage, but instead now we have to bring them up in, turn their camera on and do that. And we had to figure out these kind of fix-arounds so that it's not static. I'm really proud of this. This is my dolly. Everyone's like, what's that technology? I'm like, it's 2 Tupperwares from storage on a rolly chair. And then I could bring it around my house and talk to you. And then I had to invest in all these lights. I don't even know how to do lighting, right? I still can't find flattering lighting. But so that I had to adapt. So I used to live, I sleep there. And what has been cool is because I can still, for Sweatshop Overlord, I'm not memorized. I'm still kind of working through a Google Doc, but I put a little star sticker on this camera, and I am like looking at my script and talking, and it allows me, like when I usually prep for a show, I spend so much time like, oh my God, I have to memorize it, set in stone. And I have had this sort of flexibility to sort of change things on the fly and do things that are kind of silly. Like if I'm trying to tell a story, I tell a story about how my neighbor gave me an edible, and then I woke up on a ballot, and I'm describing like being on this edible, and I'm just seeing things, and it's like this. Like I realize that's why they have this function on Zoom to tell stories about getting high, I guess. I don't know what else you'd use it for, but so there's that. Then that has been the cool thing, is the bar feels quite low in terms of what to expect out of Zoom, and I don't have to deal with the pressure I used to of like, oh my God, they've spent all this money to bring me out, and look at all these staff people. And it's like, there's a little bit more room to play and experiment. Though I know if this pandemic was to go on, and it's not, I hope, for 2 more years, maybe the bar would get higher and higher and people wouldn't just be like, yay. at anything, but I think that has been something I've appreciated, is that I was able to create a show like Sweatshop Overlord, which basically, as the pandemic goes on, I write a few new chapters.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to seeing kind of the final result of that, and also Kristina Wong for public office. I wanted to segue into, I know you have all of us laughing right now. I wanted to mention that your recent appearance on the Lily Singh YouTube channel, to address the mass.
I was on NBC.
Yeah.
She has actually a late night show, 1:35 a.m. Who watched it?
I have to admit, I'm not quite that much of a night owl, so I usually miss it. So I see clips on YouTube. But I wanted to ask you, you did manage to insert humor and your kind of typical zaniness, which is amazing to encounter in the pandemic when all of us are kind of grieving and just feeling a tremendous loss. And now addressing this mass murder of Asian Americans, most recently in Atlanta, and thinking about continued discrimination that Asian Americans are facing. How do you think about, or maybe is it more improvisational? How do you address these topics with humor and still get people thinking about serious issues?
Yeah. Well, the Lily Singh invitation came before the massacre. And I think it was really interesting that she passed the opportunity to meet, because she is Asian, but right now it's, and South Asian, and she's also Sikh, are much more visibly, have been a visible target forever, but especially after 9/11. And now for East Asians, this is a moment where we're like, oh, wait, I thought you were just the people that, I thought you would just fetishize me on Tinder and, you know, buy me free food because of my cute Asian face. And now you want to kill me too. And they had me, I wrote the monologue and the jokes were like pretty close together. And then when the massacre happened, the jokes got further and further apart, because I had to sit with like, I'm not, and I'm seeing this with a lot of comedy on late night, is also because we can't hear an audience give feedback. So I'm talking about like Colbert, who else is doing, Amber Ruffin, like the stuff that I'm hearing, they have like one or two people in the room who are laughing. And there's a moment where I'm finding comedians aren't about making audiences comfortable, and having you sit with it a little bit longer. So that was intentional in thinking about like, we're going to call it white supremacy. Because I remember when I talked to the head writer, I was like, I don't want this to be 1992 all over again, because I live in Koreatown. This is where the LA uprisings happened. And she's like, can you get a little bit more granular? I think this is like, because I was just ranting on the phone. And then I was surprised that they let me just like call out white supremacy and demand that people take anti-racist action and stuff. And I think it's because that the violence was so horrifying that we need to sit inside these emotions, because even the news is not giving us these moments to sit in the emotion. And news is not like a great place for grieving. It's a lot of bleeds that leads. So yeah, in terms of trying to find humor from it, that has been really tricky, because I'm realizing and watching racist response to this, how and a lot of looking at my own television pilot and sort of how it just didn't go over well, that people are still trying to place this face, right? They're still trying to place, oh wow, she speaks English, or oh, what, you can be here in this country for 3 generations. And so like I can't even, it's hard to even make fun of myself, and then it's shifted context, right? And I've been described as very Californian in like reviews that are not so nice. And I think that's very true. In California, Asian Americans, we have a lot of other Asian Americans around us, and we can kind of feel comfortable to make fun of ourselves. But you take those same jokes to a town where we're the only Asian person they've seen in months. They don't, the audiences don't know what to do with that. And some jokes risk being like a free license to like, oh, I guess I can make fun of so-and-so too. Yeah, so I don't know. I guess what I try to do as a comedian, I go, what's good about this? And I'm not really finding the answer to that. And the closest I could find was like, why is this making me nostalgic for old school racism? why is this making me nostalgic to just scream konnichiwa in the grocery store to me and terrorize me on Tinder? Like, can we just go back to that, please, instead of like me full on worrying about having to fight you off in the street? And that's the closest I can get to finding any humor around this.
Well, I will recommend this segment to anyone who hasn't seen it. I'll add it down into the chat, but I want to go ahead and say thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to your future productions, and we're going to keep an eye on what you're doing. And we've loved your talk and definitely provided some levity and also serious things for us to think about.
Thank you. Thank you for having this series. What a great series. I'm going to hang on and listen on.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
I, at this point, want to go ahead and turn it over to Michael Bennett, who is going to introduce Ensemble Decipher, who is our next guest.
Okay, let's see, am I pinned? So for the next segment, it's my pleasure to introduce Eric Lemon and Joey Bohigian of Ensemble Decipher. Founded in 2017, Ensemble Decipher is a modular and experimental music group whose work integrates emergent technologies in order to highlight new voices and ways of listening. In their own words, the ensemble seeks to reflect on and challenge the power structures that face the field of electroacoustic music. Ensemble Decipher consists of Stony Brook students and recent alums, all of whom also maintain busy and remarkably successful solo careers as composers, performers, and technologists. As a group, they've collaborated with several prominent composers, and recent performances include concerts at the Society of Electroacoustic Music in the United States, the International Computer Music Conference, the New York City Electroacoustic Music Festival, and an ensemble residency at Earfest. In 2020, Ensemble Decipher was awarded the SUNY PACC Prize for Performing Arts, Creation, and Curation. And in February of this year, the ensemble was awarded a USArtists International Grant from the Mid-Atlantic Arts Council to commission and premiere new works at the New Music for Strings Festival in Denmark this upcoming August. I invite everyone to please give a warm welcome to Eric and Joey.
Hello. Thank you, Michael, for inviting us to be here. I'm Eric Lemon. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm pretty sure I have the audio set to run. Joey is here as well, and you're all asked to unmute.
Thank you. I couldn't unmute. Hello, everyone.
Great. So, and there's Joey. So we're members of Ensemble Decipher, and we would like to first thank Michael again for inviting us to present on both our performance group and how our artistic practice has shifted in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The shift of performing music from in-person concerts to the online format was shocking, unwieldy, and continues to be challenging. However, it also provided new modes of expression to engage with. For the purposes of this event, we wanted to briefly outline how we centered our practice before confinement and after, and show how confinement affected our practice concretely through some video recordings of the work we've pursued over the past year.
Thank you. I was blocked from unmuting again. So Ensemble Decipher was started in 2017, as Michael said, by Nilüfer Nurbaş, who is a fellow graduating PhD student here at Stony Brook. At the point, we were organized as a student-run laptop ensemble, and much of our repertoire was developed for this format, where we use laptops and other forms of digital and analog inputs as our instruments. While it might seem like an obvious assemblage to take into an online format, most all of the works we created and or commissioned were developed for an in-person setting. Synchronicity and the embodied experience of a live in-person concert were key to the aesthetics of those works.
With the shift to a confined format, the repertoire we had developed up until that point was either simply impossible to perform or the aesthetic experience was severely distorted. Some of the elements of performance, such as synchronicity and rhythmic coordination, had to be left behind due to the reality of performing and rehearsing across different countries and time zones in a networked setting, and the latency that comes along with it. But these limitations and constraints also posed new questions. What does it mean to perform in a networked environment? What does the networked environment offer to music beyond allowing distantly connected performers to make music together? And how can the negotiation between the positive aspects of networked music be resolved with the broader social and political issues related to confinement?
So almost as a coincidence, the onset of the pandemic coincided with larger plans we were making to take the ensemble from being a student group to a professional music ensemble. So while we had plans to commission and compose for the group, the pragmatics of these plans now had to be adapted to performing online. Our first commission as a result of this was from Yaz Lancaster and was for a networked, not a networked laptop ensemble, but an array of instruments performed via audio networking software, including guitars, bit clavier, and various electronic drones. Yaz thought thoroughly about performing online and in the process wrote a deliberately open scoring system with the broad strokes of formal sections and their differentiated harmonic content described through minute markings, rather than a traditional meter-based scoring system. So now we'll listen to an excerpt of Yaz's piece, Holding Space.
Apologies. So Niloufar Norbach's piece, Remember Me, draws upon excerpts of Nayyirah Waheed's poetry, Africa's Lament, and is sung by Ensemble Decipher's members while being harmonized through a vocoder built in Cycling 74's Max. Contra Yaz's piece, which allows for the performer choice within the broad strokes of a formal section, synchronization in Remember Me is wedded to a metronome that is broadcast to all the players and cues the timings of particular gestures in sections. So here we have a new way of managing time, not with a block of time, but with a beat. Further, Nilu contextualizes the work within the, quote, day-to-day experiences that have shifted from embodied to mediated interactions. She says that in Remember Me, the meta figures of the vocoder, which you'll hear, and the natural voice also serve as a metaphor for our contemporary experience, and thus demonstrates the value not only of remembering today, but also our past. I'll play an excerpt of Nilu's piece right now.
So I wrote this next piece, Lullaby for Stepanakert, during the 2020 War in Artsakh last fall. It blends audio from cluster munitions shot by the Azerbaijani military at a residential street in the capital of Stepanakert with a reinterpretation of an Armenian lullaby. Following the war online, restlessly searching for updates and away from support systems due to the pandemic was a very isolating experience. I wanted to evoke this feeling of distance and encourage a sense of connectedness through the virtual performance medium. The piece is intended for networked performance, such that each performer plays their part somewhat freely without a goal of rhythmic synchronicity. They gradually move through the reconstituted lullaby at their own pace while listening to each other, creating new and I hope interesting vertical harmonic relationships with each performance. In addition to this live networked performance, we took the different approach to recording the piece in confinement. To start, one performer recorded their part, then the next performer recorded theirs on top of that, and the remaining performers continued this process, layering on each part until the full piece came together. It's from this recording that we'll play an excerpt for you now from the beginning of the piece. Music is largely experienced as sound and time, and synchronicity, or the rhythmic togetherness of the temporal events, play a significant role in the aesthetic experience of performers and audiences alike. These three works demonstrate, however, that when performers and creators are cast into confinement, new temporalities are brought to bear. The reality of distance, the speed of light, as well as the surreptitious changes in network and processor latency, resist the appropriation of traditional modes of in-person and synchronous production into the networked format. It is in this way that we can think networked music as challenging the notion that synchronicity, or even the idea that any single normed temporality is given. Being networked, however, offers up an immense amount of protocological and coded control to the platforms and systems they are conducted across, a not uncommon critique of our now pervasively networked society. But when it became necessary to be confined, it also offered the members of the ensemble a creative community in which some of the problems of isolation and some of the problems associated with the vanishing of in-person creative communities could be addressed. And thank you. Yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you all very much. So now I guess we'll open with a couple of questions. Me and Joseph Swift will both ask, and then we'll go ahead and open up the floor to anyone else who would like to ask Eric or Joey something about the presentation. So my question is a little bit broad, and I don't mean to box you all in, but it has to do with Ensemble Decipher as a laptop ensemble. And I guess that's given that laptop ensembles are still kind of a relatively new phenomenon, especially compared to the rest of the history of just instrumental music in the West. Do you find that there's already kind of a performance tradition or performance practice which has been developing, or is there still this kind of element of total freedom that you found you've been able to really kind of explore over the past year in particular?
I think there was a sort of like performance practice a bit that's established, and that especially when we started, we were performing pieces that were sort of a part of the laptop ensemble repertoire to the extent that there is one. But in more recent years, as we mentioned, we're sort of grown beyond just using the laptop. We sort of have to figure it out as we go with each piece, especially when we're using other things besides the laptop as the instrument. It's like you have to relearn the instrument every time you do a new piece and figure out exactly how everything works. So in that way, it's sort of new with each project.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I had a question also somewhat regarding performance practice. A lot of the emphasis since the pandemic has happened is how we've had to adapt from what where we were to where we are now. But my question to the both of you is, how do you find, as the world hopefully opens back up, how do you find your performance practice shifting to a hopeful in-person performance setting? Or do you?
So I think that shifting to an in-person setting is more of the easier thing for most people to imagine. Obviously, working in a networked environment is relatively recent. Some of the most, I mean, there's a long history of networked or telematic works, and kind of a dehistoricizing of those terms that like reconfigures the networked music happening earlier and earlier, even into the 1930s over radio. But you know, people place kind of the initial networked music as happening in, say, like the early 90s with Pauline Oliveros's first forays into kind of using these video telephones that would send like one image every 6 seconds or something like that. The latency was immense. And then they would also perform over the telephone. And because of the way telephones do their echo cancellation, is that the person with the strongest signal into the receiver is the one that will dominate the signal through all the different connected nodes, essentially. So that makes it tricky to sense when to pass off to the next person who will then perform. But here with low latency audio and you know, high-speed networking, there's a lot more options at play. So I think that with the shift back or out into the world where we have in-person performance again, it's more that the pandemic has really pushed technology to catch up with the practice that has already been there. And I think that it really has broadened the community of people working within network music. And so in that kind of way, now that there will be two forms of performance that will have broader communities, if that makes sense. And we will play a part in both of them, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We also had a question in the chat for both of you. This is from Han Chin. Apologies if I mispronounce your name. Questions: how do you think the visual relates to the music, and how do you design the visuals?
So we had 3 pieces that we showed, and I can speak to each of them. Joey can talk about his work, obviously. The first one, the Yaz Lancaster's piece, was the visuals were designed by Rob, another member of our group, and he used, I think, Touch Designer to do some like FFT, just basically took the sound from the audio that we had recorded already, so it wasn't there, and then he fed it through Touch Designer, and it would modulate the texture based on that. It's very subtle. Obviously, it's not very strongly connected, but because, you know, we're performing a lot on Zoom or on Sonobus, which doesn't have integrated video, then we, and since lots of live streaming platforms do have visuals as well, we wanted to take advantage of that in some way, but also have it still connected to the audio. In Nilu's piece, that's more of a fixed video, fixed media work. So we did our performances online, and then we would place a video recording that Nilu took herself. Obviously, you couldn't really see much in that because at the very beginning of the video, everything's out of focus and it's very dark. But as the video progresses, it actually shows her spinning her camera around her room and showing the room, and then exposing the camera out into the window and up into the sun. Is a really beautiful progression across the form of the work. And Joey can speak about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, for the excerpt that we showed for my piece, that's screenshots from the video that I took the audio from. So I wanted to make that connection, but not in such an obvious way that I'm just straight playing the video along with it. And then there's another part where another image comes out of the darkness for the rest of the piece. But something I'll mention as well is we've had a bit of an issue in that we would sometimes do a live performance, or we're performing live from all our different locations, but we have these nice videos that we have as the visuals. And afterwards we'll hear from audience members that they thought it was pre-recorded because we got better audio quality because we weren't showing video of ourselves. Like that's sort of the purpose of using these other images. So then it became a point of like, well, how do we make clear that we're actually performing live? Because that's important to the setup for a lot of these pieces. So it's something we're trying to balance.
And the virtuality of all of that is one of the key things in network/telematic music that has been addressed by kind of practitioners in the field for a long time. I can plug our podcast now, which is called Decipher This, and you can find it. But we talked with Sarah Weaver, and she's been working in that field for a long time. She worked with Pauline Oliveros. And basically one of the key ways that you can actually expose the network setting to being actually tele-reality rather than virtual reality is to have some sort of feedback between the audio routing, because the video itself doesn't really display that even when we're sitting here now. All of our boxes could be pre-recorded and then playing back to all of you. But if we have feedback going from my voice to Joey's speakers and then back into Joey's microphone and then playing back out, then you know that it's tele-reality for real. It's a key epistemological problem for the network format.
Oh, okay. Han Quinn just replied, "Thank you. I love the visual sound pair so much." I guess I have another question, though. I expect we'll kind of start wrapping this up, and that's so you've talked a lot about how over the past year the pandemic has really affected your approach to the medium, right, and to networking. And I'm wondering, you're working with so many commissions and also composing works yourself, if you found there been an increase in particular themes in the pieces themselves, right? The works which kind of address topics which we would associate either with the pandemic or just, several of the like social issues over the past year, over the past 2 years or so. If you've just noticed any kind of trends from these various composers who you've commissioned works from.
What do you think, Eric?
So Yaz's piece is directly in response to the pandemic, holding space. If I remember when we sat down and talked with them about their work, and we did rehearsals with them, they really were emphasizing like, okay, we're here in this pandemic and we need to hold space for each other. And that's what the piece was about. And obviously we also had the quotes from Nilu, who explicitly references the kind of confined spaces that we're in. Those blurbs were not written for this. She had written those before. So, and then I'm trying to think, we commissioned kind of a repurposing from this well-known composer, Leni Pfefferman. And she had written this piece for an in-person laptop ensemble. And it's in the work, basically, we record some deeply held worries, some moderately held worries, and some kind of flippant worries. And we play them back in reverse. And then there's also these drones that get played and go through a progression, and it's supposed to kind of dissolve the worries away, no matter how profound or how inane they are. over the course of the work as they get mediated through the vocoder. So vocoder is often this big area in laptops Ensemble because it's a really sexy kind of sound to use. But then when it was repurposed for the laptop ensemble, or during the pandemic and the performances we put on, I think that the worries that we put in, they were almost ubiquitously related to that, or to the political moment of the election. You know, there are lots of things going on in the past year that were absolutely traumatic and terrible. And I think there were a lot of worries to have dissolved away in that piece, personally.
Thank you both so much for this. So I'm going to go ahead and lead us into our next segment, which will be led by Roman. But once again, thank you so much, Eric and Joey, for taking the time to be with us and for your presentation today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Sorry, hi. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I really loved the music so much. So for this next event, which will be participatory, I'd like to ask all of you to just take a few moments to think about the space that you've been inhabiting and working from for the last year of our lives. And as we all know, this time and space has represented a seismic shift in our life and work, and has undoubtedly been a source of anxiety and stress for many of us, and a lot of staring at our own faces in Zoom. So through all of this, I think that we've had this time to find out more about ourselves and our relationships to people, the spaces that we inhabit, and the things that surround us. So in the next minute or so, what I'll ask each of you to do is to find one single thing, and I use that word in the very broadest sense, from the room that you're inhabiting right now, that has somehow aided or guided you through this time of confinement, so that I can create a kind of visual group collage. And then once you've found this object, please turn on your cameras and share them with us if you feel comfortable doing so. And while you're holding these objects up to the camera, I'm going to take a quick screen capture of the gallery view and stitch these together into a kind of Zoom quilt over the next couple 5 to 10 minutes, and share the rough draft, which I'll then refine after the event and post onto the webpage. So I would ask all of you to do this now, if possible.
So while Roman is composing our collaborative COVID collage, I wanted to ask, maybe starting with the board members, but if anybody wants to share in the chat, and I can read it out loud, how you decided on your object and what this object has provided for you during this time of isolation.
It's hard to type while holding a chameleon, so I'm just going to speak. So this is a little stuffed chameleon, and I actually used it as kind of like a stress reliever. So because the sequins go back and forth, and you can like rub it back and forth, and it's just kind of cool. It's like a tactile thing, and also it's just adorable. And I like keep it on my desk sometimes, and it's just, I don't know, it's colorful, and I like to when I'm like fidgeting, I just like to move it back and forth.
Very sparkly. I see some people have more cooperative pets than I do. Does anyone want to introduce their furry friend?
I can lead us off. This is Duncan. He is turning 3 next week. We lived throughout the pandemic in a bunch of different spaces, and having, some little furry companionship, and he's very soft. So, that same sort of tactile comfort it's been really helpful.
For those of you who have books, what is it about those books in specifically that helped you through?
I could talk about Ross Gay's Book of Delights. This is a pre-pandemic book. These are just micro essays. You could see there's the whole essay, and they're all daily life, getting coffee at a coffee shop. They reconnect you to what you're missing from the sensory world, and they're short, because I think we've all taken a hit to our attention spans in the pandemic. Cannot recommend it enough. Book of Delights, Ross Gay.
And while I'm struggling and failing to move an image from one application to another, I will just share my book, which is super nerdy, Lord of the Rings. I think I've read it 10, 12 times in my entire short life. But at least during the pandemic, I think I started it again, like during the spring when I moved back to my parents' house to avoid Long Island for a while. And I'm still not finished, but it's just such a great thing to escape to when I'm feeling just overwhelmed, because it's so familiar and I know all the characters and I know what's going to happen, and I sort of find ways to relate elements of the story to my life in new ways every time that I come back to it, and I'll always treasure it. So it's something that brings me a lot of comfort. All right, and since I'm failing miserably to move an image from one application to another, unlike my practice run, I'm just going to share the Google Doc where I've pasted the screen captures, and then work on refining it later and sharing it with all of you.
Or you can take another minute or two and we can go on to Genevieve's section.
Oh, why don't you do that? And
yeah.
I'll work
and
on
then
that.
We'll share at the end.
Okay.
As grand finale. Oh, Genevieve, you're muted.
Do I need to keep holding the chameleon, or are we...
It's optional. It's up to you.
All right, I'll put it
down. No one would object.
Okay, so hello, everyone. So during the planning and creation of this event, we brainstormed different modes and different mediums of art that we could spotlight to discuss how they've changed and evolved since the shutdown last spring. One of these that's close to my heart is theater, as I received my minor in theater arts from Stony Brook. Over the course of this planning, we expanded the idea to spoken word performance at large and came up with the idea for the 1-minute monologue. This would be 1 minute for the creator to express their struggles, triumphs, and just overall creative journey during this pandemic through their chosen art form, with an emphasis on the spoken monologue. While we opened the call for submissions to the Stony Brook University community at large, unfortunately, Due to these hectic times, we didn't receive the amount of submissions we were hoping for. But fortunately, at Stony Brook, we're surrounded by so many talented artists, authors, playwrights, poets, et cetera, et cetera. So we are extremely lucky to be able to spotlight a talented poet who will read her essay/monologue inspired by the challenges of the pandemic. So I'm honored to introduce Julie Sheehan to this Art of Confinement. So Julie Sheehan was born and raised in Pearson, Iowa. She received a BA from Yale University and an MFA in poetry from Columbia University. Her poems have appeared in many magazines and anthologies, such as the Paris Review and Good Poems, American Places, edited by Garrison Keillor. She has published 3 poetry collections, Bar Book, Poems and Otherwise, for which she pulled from her experiences tending bar, Orient Point, for which she won a Barnard Women's Poet Prize, and Thaw, which in part captures the spirit of one of her biggest poetic inspirations, Walt Whitman. Her honors include a Whiting Writers Award and the New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Poetry, among many others. She is currently the director of the BFA in Creative Writing and an associate professor at Stony Brook, and she lives on Long Island with her family. So please help me welcome Julie Sheehan.
Hey, thank you, Genevieve. And thank you, Adrian and Adrienne and Ensemble Decipher and Kristina Wong. And what a wonderful mashup of stuff. And I'm glad we're going to end with a visual collage, because I got to say this essay is maybe a little bit of a downer. It's an open letter I wrote to writers. And it goes like this. I'm Julie Sheehan. I used to call myself a poet. Now is not the time for poetry, at least not in America. Now is the time for action. We're in a historic moment. We face 2 global movements, right-wing religious fundamentalism and an increasingly violent form of strongman authoritarianism. Here, both are led by white men. Both are meant to benefit white men. Both pose dangerous threats to representative democracy, pluralism, and equal protection under the law, that which, in my opinion, makes America worth writing for. Don't write, act. If you're fine with minority rule, if you look forward to right-wing Christian white nationalism, then by all means sit in a corner with your notebook and muse, on the one hand, on the other. Just prepare yourself to make concessions in your work as the ideological winds dictate. Arm yourself with the moral flexibility of Ted Cruz and be ready to overlook the sudden absence of certain friends until one day you're wheeled out in front of the banquet hall so the jackbooted thugs can say, look, we have culture too, and point at you. Don't write, act. If you're thinking, but my gifts are intellectual and aesthetic, therefore my activism will be confined to an 8.5 by 11-inch sheet of paper, please know that the plot to kidnap and kill Governor Whitmer was not a metaphor. No one stormed the Capitol on January 6th waving a poem. Your favorite short story with its finely drawn characters will not dissuade Derek Chauvin or Kyle Rittenhouse from taking a life, not in a country where Dylan Roof can join a Charleston Bible study group, spend nearly an hour in discussion with other passionate readers of that great text, sit perhaps in a circle with them, a classroom arrangement recognizable to any of you academics who teach great literature for its salvific virtues, and then pull out a gun and kill 9 of them because they were Black readers, not white ones. Don't write, act. Yeats was wrong. The best are not those who lack all conviction. The best are out there fighting for America. The worst are not the only ones full of passionate intensity. I urge you to find some passionate intensity of your own now, while this country is still deciding what it wants to become. Yes, Biden is president, and yes, Trump is unpopular, but decisions of the kind America is making, historic decisions that alter or maintain the social contract, unfold over time. One election returning us to representative democracy, pluralism, and equal protection under the law does not permanently ratify those values. We still await our second coming, our best or worst case scenario. On the one hand, our worst, the rule of law is disintegrating before our eyes, corrupted by cops, by wealth, by a justice system that pardons financial crimes and corruption, but criminalizes race, by a hard right Supreme Court intent on empowering a white Christian patriarchy, by a major political party that rewards those who demonize dissent, ridicule the powerless, and brag about their depravities, from theft to sex with children, that no woman, person of color, or Muslim could survive. Among Republicans, it's now popular to circulate jokes about Pinochet's strategy of tossing political opponents from airplanes and how that might work well with Democrats or Jews or Asians or feminazis. On the other hand, our best. Day one of the Trump administration saw the largest single-day protest in the history of our planet, the Women's March. A year later, in 2017, waves of protesters thwarted the repeal of Obamacare. In 2018, even suburban moms, hardly a bastion of radicalism, rose up to protest children in cages and help change the cruel border policy of family separation. And all this while Black people organized, so that this past summer, despite a pandemic, Black lives mattered enough for people of all races to join the protests against state-sanctioned violence, sometimes facing police violence themselves. Our social contract, based in Enlightenment values of tolerance and liberty, won't survive without a vigorous defense. And that defense must be collective. We are fighting a well-armed minority. We must use our majority to do it. All of us, the best of us, the most of us. It won't always work. America could go the way of Hong Kong, despite their valiant mass protests of 2019, or Turkey, or Poland. But even so, let's go down swinging, whether it's umbrellas or signs. Let's go down showing up. Because while collective action might not work, it's the only thing that might. Inclusive of literature. We have to try. And that means getting off your poetry sofa or leaving your writing desk to join with other Americans of passionate intensity to save our country. Don't write, act. I used to call myself a poet. One day I will again. But right now, I'm an activist. Thanks. I'll put a couple of suggestions in the chat.
Wow, thank you so much for that.
Including one here at Stony Brook that I totally recommend.
Perfect, thank you. So we have some questions, and feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we will get to it. So why did you choose to write in a form different than how you usually write?
Well, I wrote this because I was asked to do an appearance in a reading series that purports to bring writers together to read their own work, and somehow that's miraculously supposed to change things. And the closer I got to my scheduled appearance, the less able I was. I just couldn't in good conscience dig up some poems and read them and then, you know, sort of chat a little bit about what? I mean, a lot of the people who read it in the series just talked about their own work in the way they would have in any time. I couldn't do it. And so I wrote this. I guess my material has changed.
And why address it to writers specifically and not people in general?
That connected to the nature of the event. But I do think writers I think we excuse ourselves, you know, that, oh, you know, sipping my tea is a form of activism because it creates beauty that enlarges the imagination. Not right now.
No, I understand. And how do you write since COVID, since all the upheaval, and how has your writing process changed? And how has it evolved since the shutdown?
I do still write. I'm not sending my work out. I haven't figured out who I guess part of my problem with doing a normal reading was the audience. You know, who is the audience for this stuff? And this essay very much assumes that the audience is a highly educated, left-leaning group, which seems like a pretty good bet with this crowd as well, right? Like, and so I haven't figured out who the audience is. So as much writing as I'm doing is private. It's for me. And I'm also spending a lot more time on politics.
And how has your writing process changed since COVID, and how has it evolved from since the shutdown?
You know, writers, I've heard a lot of writers say that their process has not changed much at all because we are a solitary bunch. You know, we work in quiet or music or whatever. But I mean, we work alone, you know, like the ensemble we heard earlier, you know, what a social medium. Theater is a social medium. Writing poetry is very solitary. So I've heard a lot of writers say their life hasn't changed that much. The process hasn't changed that much.
And currently you teach at Stony Brook, Southampton, is that correct?
I teach here on main campus. I'm on main campus right now.
Oh,
and then our graduate students are on Southampton. So I'm teaching a graduate course and an undergraduate course.
Yeah. And how does teaching influence your writing and vice versa? And yeah.
Teaching is an incredible source of clarity. You always end up teaching the very thing, or at least I always end up teaching the things I myself am working on. And they're things that last a lifetime. Metaphor, you know, you'll never get to the bottom of it. What is a line? Like, that's very mysterious. You could think about it forever. So teaching reminds me of where I am in my own clarity about what am I after here? Why am I doing it this way? And it is social and engaging. So it's a kind of welcome relief in normal times from a pretty boring life.
And lastly, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. But my last question is, you had said that you thought of the concept of this monologue after being asked to do a specific event. But what was the process of writing this monologue, or essay, as you call it, from like beginning to end? What was that like?
It was like this. Done. I knew it. Well, I had been thinking about it, you know, leading up.
So it was just ready to come out.
Yep. Which almost never happens. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. Round of applause for Julie Sheehan. And I've just been told that Roman is ready with the collage. So perfect timing.
Roman, do you want to share your screen?
I shared a link, but I will also share my screen if that's easier. 1 second. So here it is. It's obviously whipped together in 5 minutes, but I just wanted to share what everybody, shared with the rest of us. I know as you're presenting to the camera, you can't really see what everyone else is sort of sharing with us, but thank you all so much for participating today. I really appreciate it. And then if anybody else wanted to bring up ask somebody else what they were holding up, feel free, or if they want to share more about, their particular object that brought them comfort.
Thank you, Roman. This is great to see that, we all created something together, even in our short and distanced time together.
Yes, absolutely.
If anyone else on the board has some thoughts they want to share, I will let them do that. But yeah, lots of dogs and books. That's what we've learned. 2 life essentials.
I was happy to see that too.
Yeah.
I was torn between a pet or a book, so.
I wanted pet, but pet didn't want to be on screen, so. Well, I want to say thank you to my fellow board members, and thank you again to Adrienne and Adrian who have helped us put this event together. And thank you for everybody who's attended and participated. You've helped make this event a success. And yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was really a great event, and we are so proud of what you've put together, and really has made us thought in so many different positive ways about this experience of the pandemic. I just see in the collage that my internet seems to be down at the time of that. I was holding this book just to also, it was a book, which is a Salman Rushdie take on
what sums up the pandemic more than a Zoom fail?
Yeah, exactly.
But thank you, everyone. Julie, that was magnificent. Thank you for, that kick or whatever word, but impetus that you gave us. And it was a great year. Thank you everyone for your support. Thanks Susan too for making this board a reality, and Susan Shekel is there with us. And, everyone have a great, couple of weeks as we wrap up the semester, 3 weeks maybe, with finals and everything. And it was great to see you all today. Thank you.